I never thought the person accusing me of kidnapping would be my own sister. The words barely left my mouth before a hard knock rattled the door. 3 sharp, official bangs that felt like a verdict. I opened it to uniforms and badges, breath hitching as 2 officers stepped inside, eyes sympathetic in the way strangers' eyes never are. Behind them, my 4 kids clung to each other on the couch, a tangle of tiny hands, snot-streaked faces, and questions they couldn't say out loud. One of them whispered, "Mom?" and my heart split all over again. 12 years. 12 years of midnight feeds, scraped knees, school plays, broken bicycles, and bank accounts barely balancing. 12 years of saying yes to dentist visits I couldn't afford, and hiding my own hunger so the little ones could have cereal for breakfast. I didn't sign any legal papers at first. My sister begged me, just for a few weeks, and I had no armor against a family plea. Those few weeks turned into a lifetime. I raised them like my own. I learned their favorite cartoons, their awkward jokes, the exact way one of them twisted a blanket when scared. They called me Mom when it mattered. So when the officer said, calmly, that there was a complaint filed alleging I'd unlawfully retained the children, that my sister had reported me for kidnapping, the world narrowed to a single, impossible syllable. Why? The neighbors watched from behind curtains, whispers pooling like rain outside. My phone buzzed with unknown numbers. Someone took pictures. The social media posts would soon follow, quick and cruel. My sister, 12 years ago, my phone rang at 2:17 a.m., the kind of call that drags you from sleep into a different life. My sister's voice was trembling, desperate, broken in a way that made me sit up before she even finished the sentence. "Can you watch the kids for a few weeks, just until I figure things out?" 4 kids, ages 9, 7, 4, and barely 1. I didn't ask for details. I could hear the chaos in her breath, the fear in her pauses. She said she was leaving town to start fresh, that things with her husband were complicated. Those words were so thin they could barely hold air, but I said yes. Of course I did, because that's what little sisters do. When she showed up the next morning, her car was packed to the ceiling. No goodbye hugs, no explanations, just the faint smell of perfume and exhaustion. She kissed each child quickly, avoiding eye contact, and when she looked at me, there was something in her eyes that wasn't quite guilt, more like relief. "Just a few weeks," she repeated. "Thank you." And then she was gone. Weeks turned into months, then a year, then 2. Her phone stopped working. Letters returned unopened. I told the kids their mom was sorting things out. That was the phrase I used every time one of them asked. Sorting things out. I didn't tell them I had no idea if she was alive. Life became a blur of exhaustion and small victories. I was 28, working 2 jobs, mornings at the diner, evenings cleaning offices. She showed up on a Tuesday, like she'd timed her return between my shifts so it would feel casual, as if dropping by for coffee. I was folding laundry on the porch when a black SUV eased into my driveway, polished and too new for our neighborhood. The woman who stepped out wore sunglasses even though it was overcast, a coat that cost more than my rent, and a laugh that sounded practiced, like an actor hitting a cue. A man in a tailored suit hovered by the driver's seat, watching her with the proud, proprietary look of someone who paid for everything she now enjoyed. She walked up the path with the kind of slow, deliberate smile that didn't reach her eyes. When she hugged the kids, it was the polite, surface kind of embrace people give at graduations, an obligation, not an ache. The little ones stared at her as if she were a stranger at the grocery store. Ethan's jaw tightened, and the youngest hid behind my leg. For a second, I wanted to erase the years, to find the woman who had cried on my shoulder 12 years ago. Instead, I found a version of her that belonged to a different life, clean, composed, and carefully distant. "Hi," she said, voice syrupy. "I'm back." Her words smelled like perfume and ledger sheets. She made small talk with neighbors like a politician on a campaign visit, then turned to me with a softness that felt like strategy. "I want my kids back." There it was, the demand, rude and clinical. No apology, no explanation for a dozen birthdays missed, no "I'm sorry" for empty beds or silent nights, just ownership. She didn't ask. She issued a declaration that felt like a legal brief. "You've had them long enough," she told me, as if time alone could overwrite the years I'd spent teaching them to tie shoes and how to swallow pills. "You're not fit to raise them." Her words hit like a fist. I tasted iron, and it wasn't from fear of losing my family. It was the sting of betrayal from the woman who'd sworn we were in this together. For a heartbeat, I wanted to scream every memory, and it happened on a Thursday morning. The kind of morning so ordinary it hurts to remember how quickly it shattered. The sun was barely up, coffee still steaming in my hand, when a knock shook the door. Not the polite kind, the kind that comes with authority. When I opened it, 2 police officers stood there, hands resting on their belts. Behind them, a social worker in a beige coat held a clipboard like a shield. My heart dropped before they even said my name. "Ma'am," one officer said softly, "we have a warrant for your arrest." For a moment, I thought they had the wrong house. I actually laughed, that small broken laugh you let out when your brain refuses to understand. Then he read the charge. Kidnapping. 4 counts. The mug in my hand slipped and shattered on the porch. The kids came running, Ethan, then the twins, then little Ava still clutching her stuffed rabbit. The social worker stepped forward, already reaching for them. I remember shouting, "They're mine! They're my family!" But my words didn't seem to matter. Neighbors peeked from their windows. Someone pulled out a phone. I caught flashes, shutters clicking, whispers blooming like weeds. She kidnapped them? 12 years? I always wondered why the mother never visited. My wrists were cuffed in front of the children I'd raised since they were babies. They cried until their voices cracked. I kept telling them it was going to be okay, even though I could barely breathe. One officer looked away, uncomfortable. The other avoided my eyes completely. At the station, I sat in a cold room under flickering lights, trying to make sense of words that didn't fit my life. Unlawful retention, forged documentation, interference with parental rights. Every phrase felt like a hammer blow. My sister had filed the complaint 2 weeks earlier, claimed I'd refused to return her children, and that I'd falsified birth records to keep them. The investigation dragged on for weeks. Interviews, affidavits, endless paperwork that all said the same thing. Maybe she did it. My lawyer told me to stay quiet, to let the process play out. But silence was never my strength. I couldn't just sit and let the woman who vanished for 12 years rewrite history while I was painted as a criminal. So I started digging. At first, it was small. Boxes in the attic, old mail, drawers full of forgotten things. I needed proof that she'd abandoned them. Something that would expose her story for what it was. One night, buried under stacks of yellowed envelopes, I found an old laptop. It was hers. She'd left it in a closet the night she disappeared, covered with a blanket and dust, as if even technology didn't want to remember her. I plugged it in, half expecting it not to turn on. When it did, the login screen hit me like a ghost. Same password she'd used since high school. Our mother's birthday. Typical. Most of the files were useless. Grocery lists, photos, drafts of resumes. But then, I found a folder buried deep inside the Documents section, renamed Recipes. Inside was just one file, an email chain between my sister and someone named Mark C. The subject line read, "Payment confirmed." My stomach turned. I clicked. The first email was dated 12 years ago, the week she'd left. "Mark, the transfer's done. I need you to send the paperwork before the state checks in. Once the custody signatures are gone, you're clear. Don't contact me again." My sister, "I just need the money in my account. I can't risk losing the benefits before next month. They'll believe I'm gone. Just make sure the records disappear." I scrolled through more messages, each worse than the last. It wasn't just about leaving the kids, it was about selling them. Not literally, but close enough. She had transferred guardianship on paper, pretending to give them up to a temporary care arrangement, while secretly collecting welfare and child support meant for them. She'd scammed the system, and me, using her own children as leverage. She hadn't abandoned them because she was broken. She'd abandoned them because it paid better than being their mother. I felt sick. I hired a lawyer the day I realized silence would kill me faster than their accusations. He was a woman with a clipped haircut and a folder full of questions that made me feel like I was finally being seen. We didn't whisper strategy, we built an arsenal. Every email, every bank transfer, every faded receipt I'd printed off that busted old laptop went into a thick binder labeled Exhibits. We filed them with the court, and then we fed a few choice pieces to a reporter who'd been following my story with the kind of curiosity that usually eats injustice for breakfast. The next weeks were a blur of subpoenas and TV lights. My face, once the image of a suspected kidnapper, began to change on the small screens, not into sainthood, but into someone with a story worth hearing. Clips of my testimony next to snippets of those emails created a rhythm the public could follow. Accusation, evidence, pattern. People love simple arcs. They love villains falling. Courtroom day arrived like a thunderclap. The gallery was packed. Neighbors who'd once muttered behind curtains, local anchors, a smattering of strangers who smelled drama and justice in the same breath. My sister sat at the plaintiff's table, makeup intact, hands trembling just enough to look human on camera. Mark hovered behind her like a shadow at noon, confident until you looked too closely. My lawyer walked to the bench and laid out the case. I left the courthouse with the kids in a stifling, exhausted fog, like we'd run a long race and the finish line had disappeared. We packed the car in the gray hour before dawn and drove until the skyline became unfamiliar, until the scrubby trees looked like possibility instead of memory. For a week, we pretended the newspapers didn't exist. We ordered too much pizza, let the kids stay up late, and relearned the small rituals that stitch a life back together. Pancakes on Sunday, mismatched socks, sleepy arguments over who gets the last slice. Then the headline hit like a cold wave. Former mother charged in federal welfare fraud. Investigation expands. It came from a different station than the local gossip. Federal agents, subpoenas, sealed indictments. My sister was arrested in the early hours, her confident smile gone, replaced with the dull look of someone who finally understands the depth of what she has done. Cameras circled, but nobody seemed to care about my face anymore. They watched hers, the architect of so many small betrayals, being led away in handcuffs. A few days later, a thin white envelope slid under my door. There was no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper in sloppy handwriting and a folded business card with a real estate company logo, the same company Mark used in his photos. The note read, "I called them. I couldn't live with it. You gave me the proof I needed. M." For a heartbeat, I felt the urge to tear the house apart, looking for where I'd missed his name in the email chain. But I had it all. Everything I needed had already been given to the court. Mark's card was a loose end tied neatly by someone else's conscience. Here's the part that will make your head spin. I knew before she ever accused me. I'd known. The emails were not a surprise discovery triggered by her complaint. They were the result of years of quiet watching, of cataloging inconsistencies and following threads she left behind. When she walked back into our lives with her polished smile, she thought she'd trap me in a lie. She thought accusing me first would protect her past. So I did something most people don't expect. I waited. I let the world believe whatever cruel version of me she spun, because her accusation would bring the very scrutiny she feared. I submitted the records not as a desperate defense, but as a carefully timed reveal. I wanted everything exposed on the public stage, not whispered in closed rooms or lost in bureaucratic files. I wanted the ledger of her choices to be read aloud in a courtroom, understood by strangers, and recorded in a way her practiced tears could not erase. When the federal agents closed their case, when prosecutors marked the paper indictment, the truth hit harder than any of my speeches. She didn't just abandon her kids. She had built a life on their disappearance. And when her world crumbled, it did so under the weight of the evidence she thought she had buried. We didn't dance on her ruin. There was no gloating in the eyes of the 4 children who clung to me as the cameras vanished. There was only a quiet, fierce relief, a clearing of the air that let us breathe again. Sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't about breaking someone else. It's about letting the truth do the breaking for you. Sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't destroying someone. It's letting them destroy themselves with their own lies.